I'm 24, from upstate New York, and this happened to me during my winter break from college about 2 years ago. My parents own a cabin up in the Adirondacks, pretty deep in the woods, maybe 40 minutes from the nearest actual town. It's the kind of place where you go to get away from everything. There are no neighbours for miles, just dense forest and the occasional sound of wildlife. We'd been going there since I was a kid, and in all those years, we'd never once run into another person out there. I'd decided to spend part of my break at the cabin by myself. My parents were visiting my sister in California, and they'd offered me the place if I wanted some peace and quiet. So I loaded up my car with supplies and made the drive up, arriving late on a Tuesday afternoon. The first day was completely uneventful. I spent most of it just settling in, chopping firewood and enjoying the silence. On the second day, I decided to go camping at a spot about 2 miles into the woods, where Dad and I used to pitch a tent when I was younger. I'd been planning this part of the trip for a couple of weeks, just me in a one-man tent and a night under the stars. I set off in the morning with my backpack loaded with camping gear. The hike was familiar and peaceful. I reached the spot by mid-afternoon and spent the next couple of hours setting up camp and gathering firewood. Everything was perfect. As evening started to close in, the temperature dropped and the shadows grew longer between the trees. I was sitting by my small fire when I heard something that made me stop and listen. It was distant shouting. The voices were too muffled by the trees and the echo made it impossible to understand what they were saying, but somebody was definitely out there. In all the years my family had been coming here, we'd never encountered anybody else. The shouting continued on and off for maybe 10 minutes, sometimes seeming closer, sometimes farther away. Then I heard something that really made my blood run cold. A loud bang echoed out through the trees. It could have been a gunshot or something else entirely, but the sharp crack of it made every muscle in my body tense up. That was enough for me. I quickly packed up my tent and gear and stamped out my fire, and I started hiking back to the cabin pretty much as fast as I could. The 2-mile hike back felt much longer. Every snapped twig made me jump. By the time I reached the cabin, it was almost dark and I was out of breath. I locked myself inside and caught my breath. The cabin felt safer with its solid walls and locked door, but I couldn't shake the thought of those noises I'd heard. Who was out there? Were they campers or had they gotten lost? Hunters, or was it something more troubling? I made myself some dinner and tried to settle my nerves. I sat on the table in the front room eating and occasionally glancing out of the window at the darkness in the woods. The sun was setting when I heard the sound suddenly of running footsteps just outside the cabin. Fast, frantic footsteps crunching through the snow, back and forth along the side of the building, and then a scraping sound like somebody dragging their hands along the wall of the wooden siding. My fork clattered onto the plate as I froze. The footsteps moved quickly around the cabin, circling it. The scraping continued. It sounded like somebody was searching for a way in. Then I saw a silhouette pass by the front window, heading towards the front door. A split second later, the door handle began to rattle violently. Something made me snap out of my paralysis. I stood up and forced myself to call out, asking who was there and what they wanted. The rattling stopped immediately. Then, a woman's voice responded from the other side of the door. It sounded young and desperate, pleading to be let in and saying that she needed help. I stood there completely torn. Every instinct screamed at me not to open that door, but the voice sounded genuinely terrified. I asked who she was and she begged me again to let her in, saying he was coming. For a few seconds I hesitated. Then I unlocked the door and pulled it open. A young woman practically fell through the doorway. She was around my age, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair. Her clothes were dirty and kind of torn. She looked absolutely terrified. I quickly shut and locked the door behind her, asking if she was okay and needed me to call somebody. She shook her head violently and backed away from the door, saying no police, no calls. She said she just needed to hide. I tried to get more out of her, but she would only say that her dad was looking for her and that she needed to hide. I kept asking questions, but she wouldn't say another word. She just kept shaking her head and staring at the windows. About 20 minutes passed in tense silence. The fear radiating off her was palpable, and it was making me increasingly nervous. Then she went rigid and pointed towards the front window. At the edge of the tree line was a figure, a man, tall and still, just standing there watching. She whispered urgently, grabbing my arm and begging us to stay quiet and not to move. The genuine terror in her voice sent chills down my spine. We both sank lower, staying out of sight while being able to see the figure outside. The figure stayed at the tree line for what felt like forever. He would take a few steps to the left, then a few to the right, always just staying out of full view. He was studying the cabin, looking for signs of life. The woman and I remained completely still, barely breathing. After a while, I started to get a terrible feeling that he knew we were in here. The thought of confronting him crossed my mind, but the woman must have sensed it because she grabbed my arm again and shook her head frantically. She leaned close and whispered that I shouldn't go out there, that I didn't understand, and that he was dangerous. The way she said it made me stay put. We stayed hidden, watching the figure prowl around outside for what felt like a few minutes. Finally, he started moving back towards the tree line, then stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. Neither of us moved for a long time after that. We stayed crouched there in the darkness, watching and waiting. Perhaps another 20 minutes passed with no sign of him. That's when the woman finally spoke up, asking if I could take her to town where her aunt lived. I said yes, of course, but immediately tried again to suggest calling the police. She cut me off firmly, saying no police and asking me to please just take her into town. We carefully made our way to my car, both constantly checking the woods around us. We got in and locked the doors immediately. I pulled out of there as fast as I safely could. The drive to town was silent except for her giving me the occasional direction. I tried one more time suggesting going to the police, but she just shook her head and said I didn't understand, and that it was complicated and the police couldn't help. When we reached town, she had me drop her off at a small house on a quiet street. She got out quickly and thanked me quietly and then disappeared through the side gate. I sat there in my car for a couple of minutes trying to process what had all just happened. Then I drove back to the cabin, packed up my things and left that same night. To this day I have no idea who that woman really was or who she was running from. I don't know if it actually was her father or somebody else. I don't know if she's okay or if she managed to get away. And I feel guilty about it. I should have insisted on calling the police. I should have gotten her real help instead of just dropping her off and driving away. I haven't been back to the cabin since. My parents have asked me to go up there a few times, but I've always found excuses. I can't shake that memory of that night. The shouting in the woods, the desperate footsteps circling the cabin, the figure in the darkness watching and waiting, and most of all, the look of pure terror in that woman's face. I hope she's okay wherever she is, but sometimes I do wonder if that figure's still out there in those woods, and I wonder if I'll ever know the truth about what really happened that night. When I turned 23, I started searching around for a place to live. I was looking at renting, and with my budget I was able to afford either a nice apartment or a small house in my area. I found a lot of great options for apartments, but a house just seemed so much more appealing to me for some reason. The idea of having my own space, my own yard, felt like real independence. A few months after, I finally found a house that I was happy with. It was a small 2-story home with a fenced-in backyard, and it was within my budget. The inside was outdated, but not so much that it bothered me. The landlord seemed nice enough during the walkthrough, and the neighbourhood looked quite nice and safe. I signed the lease right away, excited to finally be on my own. On move-in day, I picked up my U-Haul early in the morning and shoved my boxes and a few pieces of furniture into it, then drove down to the house. I was moving from my parents, so I didn't have that much to bring. I prepared by buying some things like kitchen utensils, but had almost no furniture aside from a bed. The whole process of packing had made me realise how little I actually owned, but it also felt freeing in a way. When I pulled up to my new home at 8 in the morning, the neighbourhood was quiet. Nobody was out and it just felt peaceful. I was really excited, already imagining how I'd set up each room and make the place my own. I got out, opened the garage, then hauled the boxes back and forth from the truck to the living room. This only took me 2 hours, but I had the truck booked for the whole day just in case, so I left it outside and planned to return it the following morning. I got to work right away, putting together the furniture for my bedroom. I dragged all the pieces of my bed frame upstairs and into my room. I got it all put together, then went back downstairs to get my mattress. Pushing this huge flimsy mattress up the stairs by myself was not an easy task. I was about halfway up, struggling to keep my grip on it. But just as I was getting to the top of the stairs, the sound of a door slamming shut downstairs scared the hell out of me. The noise echoed through the empty house. My heart suddenly pounded out of my chest as I stood on the staircase holding the mattress up. I froze there, listening intently, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. After a minute, I quickly moved the mattress up the last few steps, practically throwing it on the hallway floor. Then I ran downstairs and looked around. I wasn't sure which door it was, or if it was a person that had done it, or if maybe it was a breeze in the house. The windows were all closed though, and there was no draft that I could feel. I didn't know what to think. All I knew was that I'd heard a door slam shut, and that it sounded loud and deliberate. As I walked around downstairs, there was no evidence of anything. I mean, nothing at all. Every door was still closed or in the same position I'd left it. No windows were broken, nothing was out of place. After trying to figure it out for maybe 10 minutes, I gave up. There was nothing out of place or anything, so I just made sure all the doors were locked and continued setting up my room. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling or something, but it still didn't quite feel right. I got my bed together, then moved my dresser and the office desk upstairs. Afterwards, I unpacked all my other boxes, organising my clothes and belongings into their new places. By the end of the day, I'd finished everything. I was proud of myself and excited for tomorrow when I had plans to go couch shopping. But the exhaustion from all the physical work was finally catching up to me. At 10 o'clock, I got into bed and stayed up on my phone for a while before falling asleep. I scrolled through social media, texted a few friends about the move, and felt that satisfying tiredness that comes from a productive day. When I woke up though, my room was pitch black and I was facing the wall next to my bed. I had no idea what time it was or what had woken me up. I almost immediately closed my eyes again to go back to sleep, until I heard the wood floorboards creak on the other side of the room. The sound was distinct, the kind of creak that only happens when weight is placed in that particular spot. I turned over and looked with my eyes half open, not expecting to see anything. But my eyes immediately widened and every muscle in my body tensed. My bedroom door was open, and there was a person standing in the doorway looking at me. They looked like they were in the middle of taking steps into the room, which made the floor creak. His eyes were the only thing in the dark that stood out. They were emotionless and cold, piercing through me. I couldn't see the rest of his face clearly, just the dark silhouette with those eyes locked onto me. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't scream. I was completely paralyzed with fear. After that most horrifying second of my life, the person stepped back into the hallway, grabbed the door handle and slammed it shut with force. I heard their footsteps run through the hallway, heavy and quick, down the stairs out of the house. The front door slammed behind them. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. My chest was so tight and my whole body was shaking, but I forced myself up and called 911. My voice was trembling so badly the operator had to ask me to repeat myself several times, but thankfully the police arrived quickly. The short version of the next few days is that the police had no idea who it was. They searched the house and took my statement. We talked with the homeowner I was renting from, who said that the last resident had to be evicted for not paying rent. After a few months of no contact, all of their stuff was removed from the property. From what they were saying, the guy living there never turned up. He just disappeared without collecting his belongings or leaving a forwarding address. It's been years since then, and I obviously left that house right away. I broke the lease and moved back in with my parents until I found something else. But I still wonder about it a lot. I suspect it was the previous tenant, but then again it could have been anybody. Either way, it was clear that they didn't want me there. The way they just stood there watching me sleep before leaving still haunts me. I was 20 years old, and last year in July, I moved into a place to live by myself for the first time. It was an apartment with 8 units in the building. This apartment was the cheapest of every available place for rent on the market at the time. I had a full-time job, but I didn't make much, and really rushed myself to move out of my parents' house before I was actually ready. Looking back, I should have stayed home and saved up more money, but I was so eager to be independent. On the day I moved in, I set up an old couch in the living space and hung up my small TV, and that was pretty much it. I didn't have anything else except the basics, and I didn't have money to buy more stuff. The couch was my bed for the time being, so I slept out in the open. The apartment felt empty and a bit depressing, but I knew it was only temporary until I could afford more furniture. On my first night though, I was woken up at 6 AM to somebody knocking at my door. I was exhausted from moving and annoyed at being woken up so early. I looked over at the door, not wanting to get up, but once they knocked again I realised they weren't going to leave. I dragged myself off the couch and checked through the peephole. There was a couple standing outside my unit, an older man, mid-40s I'd say, and a woman who looked to be around the same age. They were just looking at the door, waiting for me to answer, and seemed to have no intention of leaving. Something about their faces, though, made me hesitate for a moment. I opened up and asked what they were there for. The man did all the talking while the woman just stood there with this strange smile on her face, not saying anything. He said they wanted to introduce themselves and that they'd lived in the unit one door down, pointing at the door at the end of the hall. The woman nodded along, but she didn't speak. She just kept staring at me in this weird way. I smiled awkwardly, said thanks and all that, and then told them I was busy and I had to get back to what I was doing. I closed the door and went back to the couch, feeling a bit uncomfortable about the whole interaction. The woman's stare had really unnerved me. I had the next 3 days off from work, and all I wanted to do was sleep and enjoy my new apartment alone. I fell back asleep and didn't wake up until midday. After showering, I grabbed my keys and headed down to the car to pick up some food. As I was backing out of my space, I saw somebody watching me from a window. They looked away once I looked at them, which made me uncomfortable. I counted the windows up to the 3rd story, which was the same floor as mine. and knowing there were 2 units per floor, it had to be that couple from the morning. It left me with a weird feeling like I was already being monitored, but I pulled out and left to get food, trying not to think about it too much. When I got back to my apartment, I ate while watching TV and spent the rest of the day on the couch. I tried to relax, but I kept thinking about that couple and the way that the woman had stared at me. I stayed up until 11 when my eyes started to get heavy. When I turned off all the lights and lay down on the couch, something caught my attention though. There was this red light coming from somewhere in the kitchen. It wasn't too bright, but it was blinking on and off, which became an annoyance. My heart started beating a little faster as I wondered what it could be. I got up and went to the kitchen thinking it was going to be the dishwasher or the microwave, but neither of them had lights. As I was looking at every appliance, checking the stove and the coffee maker, the light blinked off and stayed off. I was so tired that I didn't even think about it until the morning, but part of me must have felt that something wasn't right. With all the lights on now, I did another quick search, and to my surprise I found something. There was a small object wedged between a vent cover on the wall. My stomach dropped. I moved the fridge and pulled it out. There was a camera, a really tiny one, but it was 100% a camera of some kind. My hands were shaking as I stood there looking at it for a couple of minutes, trying to process what this meant. Somebody had been in my apartment and somebody had been watching me. Literally at that moment, somebody knocked at my door. I checked through the peephole and it was that same couple from the other day. The man stood in front with the woman slightly behind him. I opened the door cautiously, holding the camera behind my back. He said they were there just seeing how I was settling in, but he sounded and looked nervous. The woman still had that strange smile and kept glancing past me into my apartment, like she was looking for something. He took a step closer towards the door, and I said I was fine but busy again today. He didn't respond after that. Instead, he stood there with a strange, awkward look. The woman's smile got wider, which made my skin crawl. I felt this anticipation, like they were about to do something. Then he quickly shoved himself towards the door, trying to get inside, while the woman moved to follow him. Luckily, I was stronger than he expected. I pushed the door into him with all my weight, keeping both of them out. Eventually, I shut it all the way and locked it. My heart was racing as I heard them talking in hushed voices on the other side. I called the cops immediately, and within 10 minutes both of them were in handcuffs. When I showed the cops the camera I'd found, the man admitted it was his without even fighting, while the woman stayed completely silent. After a further investigation though, they found cameras in other units, all of them placed in kitchens or bathrooms, all pointed at areas where people would be most vulnerable. I got the feeling that by admitting to the camera in my unit, he thought the cops would trust him and not feel the need to investigate other apartments. The cops told me later that the woman had actually been the one installing most of the cameras, while the man distracted tenants. I know it was just some sick creeps who probably wouldn't have done me any real physical harm, but it gave me the weirdest, most unnerving feeling I'd ever had. The thought that they'd been watching me sleep, watching me in my own home, made me feel violated in a way I couldn't describe. I eventually moved out after a couple of months when I could afford it. Since then, I always find myself checking the apartments I move into, never trusting anything or anyone.